Uh, on behalf of the NACCW, my name is Elwin Gallen. For those that don't know, I'm the National Chairperson of the NACCW. And we are delighted this afternoon to meet on this Teams platform with our child and youth care workers. I know we've shared the bad news. One of our exciting and most highlighted event that we used to have as child and youth care workers has been cancelled. One of our events, the conference that we've planned due to circumstances beyond our control, we had to cancel it this year, but the National Executive is discussing and planning. It was supposed to be a joint conference with FITSE International as well as CYC-Net. But what we would do in terms of connecting with each other, we have got 10 webinars. We would like to have at least once a month, the second or third week of the month, this webinar with our experienced and learned and elderly child and youth care workers, international speakers, those that have attended our conferences, maybe that you would know. Our Deputy Director, Zeni Tambadu, will just inform us in terms of who's still lined up for the next 5 months. And we are quite excited because this is also an opportunity for us as we meet on this webinar and that we can connect with each other as child and youth care workers to discuss those pertinent issues in our field and promoting excellence in child and youth care work. So we want you to make your little notes. Please post your questions. We will only focus on what the presenter is sharing with us. We won't dwell in the other issues, those of regional nature or with challenges with the departments and those things. That must be discussed there in your forums, as well as in the PEC will bring those things to the attention of the NEC, and we will escalate it to the council or the department and on those platforms. The webinar is here for us to learn and to listen and to share what practice experiences we have and what we would like to know better. So once again, welcome to our members of the National Executive Committee, all our child and youth care workers, our directors of the NACCW, our child and youth care workers who are there together in the watching parties. If there are those people, our special guests on international level that's also watching, we say warm and heartily welcome. And we have to do these kind of meetings at certain time slots because the clock of the world is different for everybody. Some of us wake up and some of us go to sleep at different time slots. But we're here and we welcome and we're excited because we've got our special guest, Dr. Heather Modlin, and I'm going to ask our Deputy Director, Zeni Tambadu, just to briefly introduce then our guest speaker. And then we will hand over to her, and then afterwards I'll come back and we're going to allow you to have your questions and comments, and then we will close our session for today. Thank you very much. Zeni, I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Heather Modlin to you today. She has more than 35 years of experience in child and youth care work. She is presently the CEO of a non-profit organization called Amal Youth and Family Center, providing a range of innovative and culturally diverse services to children, to youth and families in a place called Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. Heather has served on numerous national and international boards and is currently our chairperson, in fact, the chairperson of the Board of Governors of the International Child and Youth Care Network, CYC-Net, that all of us participate in. She's also the treasurer of the Board of Directors of FITSE Canada. She's a steering committee member of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, and I had the pleasure of working with her for a while when I was on the Alliance as well. Heather is the editorial board member of the Relational Child and Youth Care Practice, and I know that many of the childcare workers read and access that journal. Heather has published numerous articles and books and book chapters and co-edited the book Relational Child and Youth Care in Action. Heather has a PhD in Child and Youth Care from the University of Victoria. Many of you know that was where Jim Anglin has been. Again, he's quite also memorable and popular to us and will be on following webinars as well. In 2017, Heather received a YWCA Woman of Distinction Award for Community and Social Development in Newfoundland and Labrador. Heather, we just want to appreciate your availability to be our first international speaker on our webinar series, for taking the time off to present to us, to have made yourself available at this, I'm sure, very early hour of the morning. And it's just always a pleasure to hear from you, and we look forward to the opportunity to listen to your presentation now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So I was just saying I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Zenny and Elwyn. Like many other people, I was quite disappointed when the conference was canceled. One of my favorite places to be is in South Africa, and it's definitely the best conference that I've ever been to, have been those in South Africa. So we share the disappointment that all of you share, I'm sure, but I'm very, very happy to support the NACCW, Child and Youth Care in South Africa, by being part of this webinar series, and certainly honored to be the first person in the webinar series. Before I start, can I ask Zenny or Elwyn, what time do you need me to stop talking? Just to make sure I'm at the right time so I don't go over.
Yes, you can take 45 minutes if you would like, and then we'll have questions thereafter.
At the end. Okay, great. 40. Okay, good. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen if sure I can do that. All right. Presentation. Okay. Can everyone see that okay?
No, it's not showing on my end, so I can't see the presentation.
It's visible now.
It is visible now?
Yes. Can everybody
see? I can also see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Many years ago, the organization that I was working at was asked to take a young person from another organization, and I'll call her Julie. And when I got the call asking if we would take her, the information that was provided was that Julie was had very complex needs, very challenging behaviors, was physically aggressive, had assaulted people. And we were told that she was at the hospital, and the hospital was refusing to release her until she came into our care. And so we took her and put a very competent and skilled, experienced team of child and youth care workers with her. And we never ever saw the behaviors that have been described to me during that phone call. We saw the potential for the behaviors. We knew that we could see how in different circumstances she could potentially be aggressive or assaultive. But we didn't see that. And after a couple of months of having Julie in our care, she was completely stable, doing very well, very happy. And I remember she went to see her pediatrician a couple of months after she had moved in with me. And her pediatrician was one of the people who had been involved in having her come to our care in the first place. And she went in to see her, and the doctor said, Julie, you look so much happier. And Julie was talking about all the things she had been doing with the child and youth care staff and all the fun she was having and how much she enjoyed being in her new home. And when the doctor said, what happened? What's different? Why are things so different? And Julie's answer was, Dr. Johnson, they love me. When I first started working in the child and youth care field, the first group home that I worked in for young people was a 6-bed program for teenage boys. And the program was designed for the most troubled boys in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the goal of the program was that young people will go in there for a couple of months and get stabilized, and then they would move on to long-term placements. Of course, what happens when you set up a program in that way for young people with the most challenging behaviors, finding alternate placements for them to move to is a problem. And so it ended up being a long-term program for the most complex young people in the province without being designed to provide that type of care. So it was very, very chaotic. It was dysfunctional. I remember my first night when I walked in to my shift, the first thing I noticed was a body-size hole on the wall in the back of the porch. It was not well cared for. The young people could be described as out of control, and so could the staff in many regards. And I remember going home after my first shift and trying to sleep and not being able to sleep. And it wasn't the behaviors or the things that we had to deal with during the shift or that. I had been working with adults for quite a long time up to that point. And so I was experienced in dealing with behaviors and aggression, and those things didn't really bother me. But what bothered me a lot was that the young people living in that home or in that house were real children. And that sounds really strange to say, because people would say, well, what did you think you were going to be working with? But it just really struck me being there that these were people's children. Like, these were real children, and they were in this house. And although they were being cared for in terms of basic needs, they weren't being cared for. There was no love. There was no nurturing. And that really, really struck me and has stayed with me for my entire career in terms of the things that I prioritize and the things that I've been very focused on since that first night at that group home, which was called Coach House. Yuri Brofenbrenner has said that every child needs at least one caring adult who is irrationally crazy about him or her. Larry Brentrow, in his book Re-Educating Troubled Youth that he wrote with Arlen Ness, says that our job is to demand greatness, that one of the things that we need to do as child and youth care practitioners is to recognize the potential and the opportunities for our young people and families to achieve that potential, even when they don't see the potential in themselves. Dr. Paul Baker talks about, in his person-brain model, the 4 areas for flourishing. and these are feeling safe, significant, respected, and related. And the idea is that in order to really flourish in our lives and meet our potential, we need to experience all of these things. And although only one of these is related, they are all relational, because in order to feel safe, significant, and respected, we need people. And I've listened to Grant Charles and Tom Garfat talk about the science of mattering. And mattering is about feeling like we have something to contribute to others and to the world. It goes hand in hand with feeling significant. So from a brain perspective, when we feel connected, when we feel significant, when we feel like we matter and we have something to contribute to the world, we experience what is called the happiness trifecta. And part of what happens in our brains when we experience those things is we have increased dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which are neurotransmitters that control for movement and motivation. No matter what framework we use, so no matter whether we look at it from a perspective of mattering or significance, safety, the areas of flourishing, whatever it is that we use, the fact is that we are wired for connection, that we are relational beings, and we survive best when we're in the company of others. And the physical presence of others, the felt connectedness of being engaged with others, can turn on the reward circuits in our brain. I've already referenced some of the neurotransmitters that are part of that process. But as it relates to working with our young people and families, Dr. Bruce Perry says, for example, trauma occurs in relationship, and trauma is healed in relationship. Relationships matter. A long, long time ago, I was involved in starting up a blacklight theater group for young people that we were working with in group homes that were provided by our organization. And for those of you that are not familiar with blacklight, what happens there is that there is a performance on stage, but all that you see is what glows with the fluorescent light. And so you would wear costumes or use face paint or body paint so that what you want to be shown on stage is what will glow under the lighting. And I had first seen a blacklight performance at a child and youth care conference that I went to in Ontario, in Canada, and it was put off by a group from Thunder Bay, Ontario, who had a group home, and they had engaged their young people in blacklight theater. And so they did a performance at this conference, and it was about mental health. And I remember being just astonished at how well they performed, but also the depth of the storyline. And went back to my organization, determined to start blacklight theater. And it took a couple of years because, things get in the way of the best laid plans. But a year or so after my first introduction to blacklight, I went to another conference in Ontario, and this time they did a 3-hour workshop on how to do blacklight theater. And so I attended that and learned all I needed to know about how to do it. And then, as part of that workshop, they required us to do a performance. We didn't know that was going to happen until the end of our workshop. But we actually ended up on stage with no notice, and I was Elvis's dancing legs. And for anyone who knows me, the notion that I would ever get on stage in front of people and dance like Elvis Presley would be completely unheard of. But because it was blacklight theater, and because no one knew who I was, and the only thing that glowed on stage were my legs, I actually did it. And it was a really wonderful idea that they had with this workshop, because plunging us into that experience of experiencing what it's like to be on stage but be unseen, was quite impactful. And so when I went back to work, we started Blacklight Theatre. And at first we had 6 or 7 young people join, and then after a while word got out, and the numbers went up significantly. But for our very first performance, which we did 3 months after we started Blacklight Theatre, we did it on being in care. And the young people wrote the script, they made the costumes, we designed the sets, made all the props, and then performed and narrated. And so the beauty of this experience is that there are many different ways to be involved. So if you don't want to be on stage, you can be behind the stage helping out as a stagehand, or you can be narrating from behind the scenes so no one would see you, but they would only hear your voice. You can perform on stage in a very safe way because nobody sees you. You're wearing masks or face paint or whatever we're using to kind of light up whatever body parts we want to light up. And so we did our first performance. The young people were engaged in all of these things. And we did our first show in front of 300 people. It was the 30-year anniversary for our organization. So we had a significant gathering at a hotel. A lot of people were invited from former young people, families, government, and the show went off without a hitch. The dress rehearsal had been a disaster, and we had young people running through the halls of the hotel and all kinds of things. But by the time we got to the performance, they did an amazing job. And what I noticed, the first thing I noticed after the performance, after the second standing ovation that our performers got, is that they walked off that stage as Blacklight Theatre performers. They weren't kids in care. They weren't group home kids. They were performers. And the way that they mingled with their audience, their fans, and I watched young people grow taller that evening. Their heads were raised, their shoulders were raised. They just looked like different young people. And we saw that happen throughout all of our Blacklight experiences. We ended up taking it on the road and performing in other locations, and we went on a trip to Toronto to meet with a professional Blacklight theater group and do some training. And but I use that as an example, and I could tell many stories from Blacklight, but I'll move on from here now. But just to say that when you look at it in terms of the elements of flourishing and mattering and demanding greatness and all of the things that I just referenced, all of those were wrapped up in this experience that we were able to have with our young people. And we really saw incredible transformation over time as we were able to give them ways of being different than they thought they were or than their previous experiences. Now, here's the other side of the story. When we're not connected, when we are relationally impoverished, when we're experiencing a crisis of disconnection, then we can be in trouble. We can go into a state of what's called alonement, and this actually leads to the brain feeling urgency or emergency. And when we're in a state of alonement, we can do all kinds of things to try to get connected. And we see that in our young people and families all the time. We seek out artificial connections, or we engage in behaviors that may not be safe or may be risky, but we're in a constant state of seeking connection. I worked with a young person once a very long time ago, and he came to us from another organization where they had not known how to deal with his aggressive behavior. And so what had been put in place is that the kitchen had been created into a safe room for the staff. And so whenever the young person would get aggressive, they would lock themselves in the kitchen. And the program was that when his behavior decreased, then they could leave the kitchen and go engage with him. This young person at the time this was put in place was about 12 years old. He was developmentally delayed, so cognitively he was functioning at maybe a 2 or 3 year old level, thereabouts. And of course, what happened over time with that type of programming was that the aggression increased, because what would happen is the staff would be in the kitchen. There was a window so they could look out at the young person and he could look in. And what happened is, because he was alone so much and entered into a state of alonement, that he would be banging on the kitchen door, he would be jumping up and looking in the window, he would be kicking the door, and the staff never got out. And so inadvertently what happened is this boy ended up spending most of his time alone for about a year or longer. And by the time we started working with him, he presented as almost feral. He was extremely dysregulated, and there were all kinds of things had happened that made the situation even worse than it had been at the beginning of this programming they put in place. Because, you know, and that's an extreme situation. We don't offer encounter situations quite that extreme, but I certainly am familiar with programs that have protocols or processes in place for dealing with issues that result, you know, that include staff leaving, going to another room. And from my perspective, what we're doing when we engage in those kinds of behaviors ourselves is that we send a very clear message to the young people that we're working with: when you are in distress, when you are in pain, we will leave you. And I think that without having an understanding of alonement and what can happen when we have no meaningful connections, when we are feeling alone, then we can create situations that are quite damaging. The other thing to note about alonement is that it is a perception. So we can be surrounded by people and still be in a state of alonement. So it is our perception of being connected to other people that drive that particular feeling. I think the other thing it's important to note around relational engagement and connection is that, you know, we are who we are in the context of the relational environment that we're in, right? So, you know, we all tell stories and create stories about the young people and families that we work with. And those stories tend to drive our perception of those individuals and their behavior. And then we respond to the stories sometimes instead of the real person, without an understanding that who that person is in one context is probably more related to that context, and particularly that relational context, than who the person really is holistically. I worked once with a mom, a parent, and before we started working with her, she was one of the notoriously well-known parents in the system that everybody was afraid to engage with, because she had had a lot of very negative experiences in her life, and many of those were within the system. She had been left alone to raise 7 children by herself, and she had no help, and she was cognitively impaired. So there were some limitations that prevented her from fully being able to parent without help, which she didn't get. And then when she came to the attention of Child Protection, all of her children were removed, but she never ever fully understood why or what the issues were, and nobody would engage with her in a respectful way to give her the information. And so she did the things that she needed to do, which included calling social workers 50 times a day, going on the radio to talk about her negative experiences, showing up at political events to demand answers from the minister. And she had quite a reputation by the time we started working with her. And she joined a parent group. That was how we came in contact. And I remember before she joined the parent group, I got a call. I was working out of one of our group homes at that time, and I got a call on the general group home phone number. So anyone could have answered that call. It could have been one of the staff. It could have been one of the kids. Luckily, it was me. And the first thing she said when she called is, yeah, I got to join your effing parent group. My social worker told me if I don't join your parent group, I'm not going to be allowed to see my kids. And then I proceeded to get her whole life story. She didn't even know who I was. And so when she joined the group the first night, she really didn't want to be there. She was forced to be there. And so she sat with her arms folded the whole time and a big scowl on her face for the first hour or so, just to make sure that that we knew how much she was not enjoying herself. And we did an activity. One of the first things we used to do in parent group is an activity where you would draw your family as animals. And it was a way for us to get the parents to start talking about their family dynamics. And she refused to do that. And she sat with her arms crossed. And we said, that's okay. You don't have to do anything in parent group you don't want to do. We're just happy to have you here. And, would you like another coffee? And so as the night went on, and she watched everybody else engaging in things, and we were very, open and tolerant and just happy to have her there and not putting any pressure on her. By the end of the night, she was starting to come around a little bit, and we played bingo. We always had a game at the end of parent group, and the parents could win a door prize. And so we played bingo. We knew she loved bingo, so she played that because she couldn't resist. And she won the prize because we had rigged the contest. So, and she came back, and she actually ended up staying in our parent group for 2 years. And we worked directly with her in her home with her children after that period of time, doing family support work. And she was one of my favorite parents that I ever worked with. She was lovely. She was so kind and thoughtful. She used to make plastic canvas ornaments. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically a craft. And she used to make Christmas ornaments to hang on the tree. I have a closet full. She just made those ornaments for people that she cared about all the time as a way to engage and be connected and give to others. But when I think about this mom and the stories that had been created about her, and then the way in which that influenced the relationships that she had with people in the system, that it really influenced people's engagement with her and her potential to grow. And we were just really fortunate to have the opportunity to get to know her in a different level, and to find out that who she was in some contexts is not who she was. It was the context. And we see that a lot. Oh, we're gonna that one. It's the little things that matter, right? We talk about that a lot in child and youth care practice, that our work occurs in moments. It's the moment of engagement with a young person, with a mom, with a dad, with the grandmother. The little things matter. I once left an organization, and a few months after I had left, I got an email from one of the supervisors saying, I just had to email and tell you that this young person, I'll call him Bradley, he said, Bradley has been talking about you since you left, and I just thought that you would like to hear this story that he just told me. He said, Bradley went to him and said, I'm very sad that Heather's gone. And I remember my very first day that I moved in, he said, I went to the office first and she was there. And he said, she greeted me. He said, and back then I was 10 years old and I was a little shit. He said, but she didn't treat me like a little shit. She treated me like a person, he said, and I never forgot that. And I was stunned when I heard that, because number one, I really didn't remember that particular encounter, but I, try to treat everyone respectfully. But what stunned me the most was that was 10 years earlier. 10 years earlier, we had had lots of encounters in those 10 years in between, some that I would say were positive and some perhaps might not be characterized as quite as positive, but that was the one thing that he remembered, was the first moment that he met me, it just was a very impactful reminder of how important every moment is. And we really don't know when we're engaging with people, young people, families, our colleagues, people we supervise. We don't know how each moment might be received or how it might impact on the others. So it's such an important reminder for us to always remember that. And I think it's also important for us to keep in mind that wherever we work, that there are thousands of opportunities for us to engage in the life space, whether that's in a school or a group home or a treatment center or outreach or after school, or that there are thousands of opportunities to engage with young people and families in ways that can promote connection, that can create opportunities for them to feel significant, to feel valued, to feel like they matter. And I think we need to remember that often we need to be very persistent and tenacious. You know, when we work with young people and families who have experienced trauma, who have experienced rejection, who have experienced all the kinds of things that our young people and families experience, they don't just automatically trust us because we say, trust us. You know, their experiences have not led them to easily trust often. And so, as Tom Garfat, you know, has said, our young people have in their brains adults, pain, click, right? And so if we're going to change that neural connection, if we're going to change those stories, as Jack Phelan would say, then we need to give different experiences that over time will result in a different connection and different stories. One of the supervisors that I have worked with over the years, who is extremely gifted child and youth care worker, is very, very good at hanging in. It's one of the characteristics of child and youth care practice. And she worked with a young person once who was very, very relationship wary, and for good reason. He had been moved multiple times in his life, and even within our organization, he had moved, and we never moved anyone, but there were just so many things happened that resulted in him having to be moved. And so he was done with being in care. He was done with adults. He was done with everyone, and he just stopped coming home. He just wasn't home. He was out living. He was only 14 years old, and he was out on the street. We knew he was engaged in very heavy drugs, and he just completely disconnected. He was done with all of us adults who had hurt him a lot over the years. And so she went in and said, we need to find a way to connect with him anyway. Right now, anything we can do, he needs to start connecting with somebody, or he is going to be in a state of alonement for his entire life. And we can see what that's doing. And so she found him. She went out driving around the streets, and she found him and went and sat down next to him, introduced herself. He didn't know her because she was taking over as a new supervisor. We had strategically put her with him. And she said to him, like, we're here if you need us. If you need anything at all, call anytime. We will be here. We want you to be safe. All those things. So that night at 1:30 a.m., he called and said, I need McDonald's. And they said yes. Now, under normal circumstances, I would never recommend that we go out at 1:30 in the morning, pick up a young person, and bring him to McDonald's. You know, but in this case, he needed to start connecting. This was a test, of course. He was a very smart kid. That was a test to say, hi, you said call you anytime. I'm going to prove you wrong, because adults never mean what they say. They picked him up and dropped off McDonald's to him. And that continued for a while. But over time, the expectations were increased, so that at first it was, we'll drop it off and bring it to you. And then, you know, we'll try and get some conversation out of you, but he wasn't very talkative at first. But then over time, he would engage for a little while. And then eventually our supervisor said, I'm going to go, I'm going to come and get you, and we're going to go through drive-through together. and because she could squeeze that out at least a good 20, 30 minutes. And then over time it was, we're going to go eat in the restaurant together, and then we're going to cook you food and bring it to you. And it just continued to kind of increase, so that over time the relationships were being built. And eventually, it took several months, but eventually they got him back home in the house. But I like sharing that story because I think she's so gifted in her understanding of the situation and what this boy needed. And it was so very, very different from what we would normally do with many of our other young people that we're working with. This is the part where I say love is not enough. And that might sound contradictory to everything that I've talked about up to this point. But, you know, relational practice does not mean anything goes. And sometimes I think it gets misinterpreted. Relational practice also includes setting boundaries and limits, and having expectations and structure and routine, and all of those things are part of relational practice and part of caring for young people. And, you know, I sometimes will talk to new practitioners who kind of come in like full of passion and enthusiasm for the work and ready to get out there and change the world. And they're just crushed when the young people don't respond positively the first time that they you know, show their wonderfully caring nature to them. But that's because of the young people's experience, of course, right? Those of us that have been in the field for any length of time know that, and we understand where that comes from. But part of what needs to happen, though, as we build the relationship, is we need to embed safety in that relationship as we build it, because that contributes to trust and the whole relational evolvement. And that's the hard work at first, right? Jack Phelan calls that pre-relational work. Like, we need to set up ourselves as a safe person. And that means we have some limits, we have some boundaries. We do some of those tough things that may not be as fun or pleasant, but that will set the foundation for the relationship to be built upon. And I think that's a really important point. I remember once, a long time ago, I was writing a journal article about new staff. And I never ever finished the article. It didn't get published. But at that time I was writing this article, I was fascinated in the notion of new staff in group care. And so I gathered together our kids in a group home and said, look, I'm writing this article. I'd really like to get your opinion on new staff. What is it like when new staff come in? Or if it's not new staff, like relief staff, people that are new to you. What is that like? And one of the young people who did really, really well when the core full-time staff were with him, but did horribly when new staff or relief staff were there. He was the one they were all afraid of. You know, we had a lot of people refuse to work in this particular home because of this boy. And he said, the first thing he said is, they don't know what time to have supper. And I said, he said, and they don't do this right, and they don't do that right. And as he went on, I thought, that's about safety, isn't it? That's about safety and predictability and trust. And what he's saying is, I don't think they can keep me safe. And therefore, I must go on the offensive immediately, because I feel like I'm the only one that can keep me safe when they're around. And then he identified, I said, but there's this person or this person, they work, and you seem to do fine with them. Like, what is the difference? He said, because they know what they're doing. And when I looked at who they were, those were the people that were coming in confident, or at least portraying that, you know, ready to tackle the shift, not appearing hesitant, not appearing afraid, and setting limits on his behavior. When he started to go off the rails, they would just stop it instead of kind of stepping back and trying to negotiate their way out of his behavior and things like that. So relationships are built. It's important for us to keep that in mind. And not all engagement is relational, and not all relationships are the same. A couple of years ago, my mother broke her hip. She's 86 years old. And so she was in the hospital for 6 weeks because she had to have hip replacement surgery. And within 24 hours of her being in the hospital, I could tell by her mood when I went to visit which nurse was working. Because if she was sitting up in the bed and with her hair brushed, smiling and talking to the other people in a room, I knew that one of the good nurses was working. That's her words. There was good nurses and bad nurses. But if she was lying in the bed, in a darkened room, with her eyes closed when I went in, I knew one of the bad nurses were working. And it was stunning. This continued for the entire time she was in the hospital. And so I was there enough that I kind of could see how all the nurses operated differently. There weren't any real bad nurses. All of the nurses took care of what they were supposed to take care of, her medical needs. They all came in with her medication, did her blood pressure, did the things they needed to do. All of them did that. The difference between the good nurses and the bad nurses is that the good nurses engaged relationally. They would poke their head in, and it wasn't a lot. They didn't do a whole lot more, but what they did was profoundly impactful in a different way. So they would poke their head in and say, do you want some more ice cream? Or they would pop in and say, how are you feeling? Or how did this impact you from today? Or is there anything you need? Or she didn't have to go looking for them in order for them to demonstrate that they were interested in how she was doing. Whereas the other nurses, she had to ring the buzzer if she wanted something. She knew they weren't going to go in unless she needed something. And as I thought about that, and it was a significant difference in how it impacted her, significant, complete transformation in her behavior and her mood. And then I thought about that in terms of child and youth care practice, particularly in out-of-home care, but also in other contexts. You know, we see it all the time, don't we? You know, depending on who's working is going to determine how the young people do. And so that's a lot of power we have. We have a lot of power over how things are going to go on a shift in a day, whatever. And I think it's important for us to always be aware of that and to be recognizing what we're doing. And again, it goes back to the moments and how that's impacting on the other individuals that we're working with. So up to this point, I've focused on the relational environment for young people. And so in my remaining few minutes, I'm going to talk about the relational environment for practitioners, because everything that I've talked about up to this point is important for the adults too. So, you know, child and youth care practice is hard, right? It's hard work. It's hard and it's strange. And it's not something that you can really be fully prepared for until you're in it. So there are things that we have to deal with that no one could possibly understand or relate to. And, you know, quick story, I remember being in a meeting several months ago. It was just several people. I think it was, we were meeting about something in a boardroom in our office. And one of our supervisors, who was out in one of our homes, sent a text to his manager, who was in the meeting, very excited, saying that the young person he was working with, they'd only been working with him for a month or so, had just told one of the staff that he was going to stab his penis with a fork. And we all immediately, there were about 8 people in this meeting, immediately all of us said, oh my God, that's so amazing. If you were coming from outside of the field, looking in at us, you would have said that we were just complete sadists. But the context was, this little boy was 9 years old. Up to this point, if he was frustrated or upset with someone, he wouldn't have said something. He would have attacked them with his hands or his teeth or his feet or something. And so he hadn't hit anyone, he hadn't bit anyone, he hadn't thrown anything. He had just used his words. We were thrilled. And also, it was kind of funny. You know, child and youth care workers develop a strange sense of humor, and it was it was a very creative use of words that he chose in that situation. So here are some of the professional expectations of child and youth care practitioners, are that, you know, we have to have the ability to set limits and establish clear boundaries, to respond safely and effectively to challenging and aggressive behavior without personalizing the behavior or depersonalizing the young person. So those are the most important pieces of that particular expectation. We have to be able to deal effectively with conflict, to engage in reflective practice, to be able to use ourselves consciously in interactions and engagements with young people and families. Here is what the reality sometimes is instead. So we have volatile and punitive environments, out of control behaviors of young people, difficulty with limit setting, controlling coercive practice, over-identification, boundary violations, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, staff turnover, and burnout, all those things. And the difference sometimes, actually most of the time, in being able to function at the optimal level as a child and youth care worker in whatever environment we're in, or functioning in the ways that I just went through that would be considered not healthy or dysfunctional, would be connected to the environment, and particularly the relational environment. William Kahn has done a lot of writing about what he calls the caregiving organization. And this refers really to any organization whose primary function is the provision of care to others. And so child and youth care workers certainly would be considered to fit within that definition. And a lot of Kahn's research has been done in child and youth care related organizations. But if you look at the characteristics of a caregiving organization, it's, the young people, the families, the individuals that we work with are in pain. Jim Anglin has talked about that in his research, that our young people engage in pain-based behavior and they are soaked in pain. And so by the proximity to that pain, frontline child and youth care workers, practitioners are also absorbing the pain of the individuals, families they work with. And so in order for us to not have that pain stay with us, the organization needs to absorb it from us. That's in a nutshell. And so if you look at, we all need to be held, right? And organizations need to hold employees in order for them to be able to deal with the situations. That's my grandson, by the way. I just have to look for all opportunities to put him places. And two of the primary functions of holding are emotional containment and growth. And I'm going to clue up now because I know I'm 1 minute over time. So, but if you look at emotional containment, it's really about giving opportunities for people to express how they feel about the work or within the work in ways that are supportive and allow for reflective practice and engagement to occur. Really, if we're dealing with anxiety or things that are challenging, the only way to effectively deal with that so that it doesn't sit around forever is to move towards it. But we have a natural tendency sometimes to move away from it. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that as we provide environments for practitioners to work in, but also as we provide environments for young people and families to grow in. And so, okay, I'm going to end on this slide. In a functional caregiving organization, pools of caring are created at each level and spill over like waterfalls down the organization, finally depositing in the streams of care seekers. That's a quote from Kahn that I like. So we'll stop there and I'll answer whatever questions you have in whatever time we have remaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Modlin, for enlightening us and taking us to childcare practice and building these significant relationships. And you've also given us some good concepts. I could see there in the chat box how people are saying mattering and demanding greatness, and some new concepts of flourishing, etc. But I will leave it over and see if there are people that would like to ask some questions or share from their side anything that they would like to ask for clarity, from your side. Let me see. So participants, those that are with us, welcome those in the in the watch parties. I see we've also got friends there from abroad, there from Canada that are with us. So we also want to say welcome to them. Let me just see, we're gonna perhaps give a chance for 5 or more questions, but I only see Donald's hand is up. So I'm gonna hand over to Donald to pose his question. Donald?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks very much to Hida for the excellent presentation. There is a lot of learnings that have come out of this presentation. And while you may be far away in terms of distance, what you have spoken about challenges that we come across as child and youth care workers in South Africa. And I also want to indicate the issue around that the moment is very important. You know, we learned a few years ago that making moments meaningful, it's key in our work as we interact with children. And the other point is around alonement. I find that one very interesting because, you know, what we find, and especially in South Africa, it even feels like it's getting worse now, where children are feeling that they are being disappointed. Child and youth care workers may be doing everything that they can, but you know, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic also made it worse, where families are concerned about the making a livelihood, and the child and youth care centers just this week, where we are finding that many of them have not received their grants from government, and children do not have food to eat because the child and youth care centers cannot provide, they don't have the money to buy food. So the disappointment sometimes it's not only coming from the people very close to them, but from government as well, who are supposed to be making sure that money is provided for them to the child and youth care centers and organizations to buy the necessary needs, and that is seen not to be happening. And even though the child and youth care workers may try by all means to create relationships and you know, help these young people to be hopeful and look at life positively, but we find that we are being failed by the system. I know that you do not have an answer for that, but I just feel that it is something, it is forces that child and youth care workers find themselves having to deal with. So thank you very much for your presentation, a great presentation. It very much relates to what we experience in our work in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. And what you've described there really is, if you look at it from a needs perspective, is you've got a situation in which you don't even have the capacity sometimes to help children and families meet their basic survival needs. That makes the work even much more challenging if you talk about attempting to meet other needs higher up on the hierarchy, if you're looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. There's some people that also commented in the chat box that what they've learned today, not all engagements are relational. A wonderful presentation, Dr. Heather, and depersonalizing the child, a new concept into our child and youth care language. So those are some of the comments I saw there on the chat box, but I see I've got 2 other hands up. I'm going to allow, I see I've got Masindi and then Sibongile. So we'll ask Masindi first to ask the question and then the Sibongile. Over to you, Masindi. Just unmute. looks like Cindy's there, that side has got a challenge. Let's go, Sibongile. You may speak then.
Hi, everyone.
Afternoon.
Yes. Thank you for a very informative presentation. I think it's one of a once in a while, because I think it's our first time having this kind of presentation that we always need as child and youth care workers. The part that was more interesting to me is the one that is saying not all engagement is relational, and not all relationships are the same, because it's a challenge in a way for us as child and youth care workers to always engage with a purpose when we're engaging with young people. And I liked your example of nurses that are like always come and pop in at the ward to check on their patients, than the nurses who wait for a ring, for only when the patients needs them. It shows that sometimes you can say that they even forget about them while they are sitting there busy with other things, or maybe chatting or whatever. But when the nurse always make time to pop in and check, do you need more ice cream, and whatever question that they asking, it shows that you always in their mind, you always in their heart. And I think it is related somehow big time to us as child and youth care workers, to respect the relationship that we have with children, because once you respect it, and you want to see the impact yourself, because once there is an impact in the relationship, or in your contribution that you're making to the life of the young person, you have that relief, you have that joy, and sometimes you even feel like it makes more impact to you as a child and youth care worker than it does to the child itself. Thank you so much. That was so informative and helping in a way as we're moving on, engaging and supporting our children.
Great, thank you. Good example.
I don't see any other hands being raised. Are there anyone else? I see Zemi. Is there anything that you would like to comment or share?
Thank you very much. I just thought to go back to Sandra's question, and maybe we could answer that. And I do have a question of my own. But she talked about that depersonalizing the child and youth. Child is a new concept to bring into our childcare language. And what exactly do childcare workers do that depersonalize a child or a youth? Could you give us some examples? I think it's a good question. So we might be doing things we don't even realize we are doing. That's not, there is.
Absolutely, it's a great question, and I think we do it a lot without realizing. So, we depersonalize when we stop seeing the child, and it's easier to do with parents too, by the way, but with children, when we stop seeing the child as a full child, and we start seeing them as something different. So, and this can occur when we are drained from dealing with young people's behaviors, or I've seen it happen with young people who are very aggressive, for example, and staff are just tired of dealing with them, or they're scared, or they're frustrated. And so the way in which we start talking about the child changes, we start talking more about the labels, or we talk about the behaviors, but we stop seeing them and talking about them as if they're a full child, right? And And by doing that, through the way in which our language is used, the way in which we start to view them as their, their behaviors or their label, or we slowly then also start to distance ourselves from them, so that if we don't provide them with the care that they should get, or we kind of remove ourselves from the relational part, that creating that depersonalizing distance enables us to move farther away without feeling any sense of the same kind of guilt or remorse or whatever it might be if we were moving ourselves away from a child under other circumstances. And so it's really a process of forgetting, in some ways, that we're working with full people, with the whole range of humanness, and just focusing on the areas that are problematic. And by doing so, we depersonalize, and then we don't engage in ways that are relational. Does that make sense? If that doesn't make sense, I'll try and explain in a different way.
It makes sense to me. I wonder if anybody else wants to comment or follow up on that point. This Sibongile there. Go ahead, unmute.
Yes, I think it does make sense, and I'm not sure if I'll be out of point here, but our concern currently as child and youth care workers is that it's a pity that we are trained as child and youth care workers, and we understand our scope of practice. However, we are currently in a situation where we find ourselves moving away from who we are, and maybe because of the kind of program that is available that time, or because of the opportunities that are available at that time, considering us as child and youth care workers. But when it comes to the actual implementation of that program, in terms of engaging with children and engaging with the child in depth as a child and youth care worker, and we know our principles, our concepts, then the program itself, or even though it is an opportunity, but it does not give you that opportunity to pull out and identify and plan and engage at that level. And to me, it goes as far as feeling guilty of not giving respect to this relationship with this young person, because I'm not doing justice. But at the same time, the expectation is pulling me to a totally different direction in terms of me to satisfy or to deliver or to respond to the expectation that time. It calls me to ignore a very components and areas when it comes to my engagement, and expecting to see the impact from this young person.
Yeah, and what you've described there isn't just specific to South Africa. That shows up all over the place as it relates to child and youth care practice. Part of the bigger systemic issues in some ways. Yeah.
I'm not too sure, Chair, if I can go with the next I wanted to ask my question. I wanted to say, Heather, in South Africa, we work in different contexts and different programs. We're working in schools, we're working in communities, we're working in child and youth care centers. We are working in rural communities and townships, and we're working in a variety of different programs, government and non-government. You talked about the characteristics of a caregiving organization and a caring, organization. Many of us are not working in caring organizations. I think Sibo raised that in some way as well. And the program and the structures don't allow us to be relational. What tips can you give us about how we could, despite that, practice?
That's a wonderful question. And again, that would be characteristic of not just where you are located, but many places as well. I mean, I think that it is difficult, but not impossible if you're working within a very dysfunctional, especially if you're within a bureaucratic system, because sometimes those can be the most difficult to navigate, particularly as a child and youth care practitioner, because there's often quite a disconnect between the way the organization works and the way we need to work. But I have seen happen in other organizations that struggle with that, small pockets of health showing up. And so sometimes it's about, if frontline practitioners or even frontline managers or somebody in the organization can have some awareness of the critical importance of relational engagement, not just with young people, but across, with colleagues, with supervisors, all layers of the organization, it is possible to create little pockets of holding within larger dysfunctional organizations. But that requires conscious effort on the part of everybody there to really look at what can we do within this broader context that can still be supportive to us, or that we can be supportive to each other in ways that are not going to fully buffer what I have to deal with the organization, because there are often things we're going to be subject to things that are happening because there's no way not to be. But sometimes there are ways we can buffer ourselves from some of the external stuff. And so at least provide some of that relational support, across teams or within teams. Like I've seen situations in child protection, for example, where you'll get a really strong supervisor with a good understanding of relational engagement, and he's got a healthy team, or she's got a healthy team within this very large organization of complete dysfunction. And so that is possible, because if we're talking a relational is the key, that part, we can do that across each other. And so what tends to happen sometimes in organizations that are very unhealthy, where they're operating from a very, either top down or authoritarian or, whatever kind of style of leadership that doesn't really promote relational engagement, is sometimes what happens is everybody in the organization is caught up in what's happening in the organization. And then what happens is, the whole focus is on all the things that are happening in the organization and the dysfunction and how bad it is and stuff, and which, quite legitimate, right? When you're living it, it's bad. But if teams can get themselves away from that and kind of put the blinders on, so you deal with what's out there when you have to, but you're not going to be focusing on it, all the time, then, and focus on what can we do with ourselves that's going to help us move this forward. What kind of control can we find within this situation that we can do something about? And sometimes that might be only a tiny little piece that you can do, and sometimes there might be a little more you can do that you're not really aware of, because again, when we're in an organization that isn't promoting that, it's also usually not promoting creativity or thinking outside the box or empowerment. And so we kind of can get trapped in that organizational mindset. But sometimes there are little things we can do that might make a significant difference to, because the whole notion of holding and being held, we in my organization, we're very, very big on that. We use that language, we talk about it a lot. But I've seen how important it is. But the other part of that, though, is I also have seen through experience and through my research how important a supervisor is. So you can have an extraordinarily dysfunctional organization, but if people have a supervisor that they can trust, that they can rely on, that's there for them, that they feel a connection with, they can withstand just about anything else. And so again, those of us in supervisory roles can kind of take heed. You can be in a very dysfunctional environment, but you can still take care of your team. Then the key is finding ways to get held outside of the organization. And sometimes, that means pulling in colleagues from other places, connecting across organizations, stuff like that. It requires some outside help because you can't do it by yourself if you don't have support in the organization. But yeah, so those are just some of the long-winded answer, but and very important question and topic.
Thank you very much, Heather. I see we've just got another question here in the chat box from Tabang Litsolwo from the Northern Cape. My question is, how do we deal with the new trends of child behavior, referring to a community child and youth care worker, because sometimes we're far from resources like doctors, psychologists, etc. Are we equipped enough to deal with new trends of behavior that sometimes we get tired of the child because we run out of options or programs that are beneficial to children behavior? So that's the question that, the long question that I've posed to you, Dr. Heather.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think that happens a lot, right? Like, I think that question is very, very good in that it acknowledges the experiences of many child and youth care workers in many contexts, because sometimes the work is difficult and we don't have the answers and no one else has the answers either. And so it can often feel like we're banging our head against the wall. And I think from my experience, what I've learned over the years is when we get to that place, that it's really good for us to start questioning, number one, what we're doing, but also reaching outward. So this is where things like this are very helpful, like going online and reading, talking to other colleagues. I think it's very easy for us in this field and in the whole human services field really, but in child and youth care particularly, it's very easy for us to get caught just doing the same things over and over. And even when it's not working, and then we get into, we blame the child for not responding to our interventions, or we blame the family, or we blame the system, or, it's very easy for us to get trapped there. And particularly because as frontline child and youth care workers, we are the ones dealing with the behaviors on the ground. So you're not just dealing with issues theoretically. We're not just, hearing and being exposed to pain and very sad stories and all that thing, which is difficult enough for professionals who deal with that. We have all of that, plus we have the behavioral manifestations of that pain. So child and youth care workers are the ones who may be dealing with the swearing or arguments or physical aggression or verbal aggression, or just, there are all kinds of things. And it certainly can be tiring. And there certainly are, from what I've heard and what I've seen, just in terms of the impact of COVID, mental health issues on the rise, that comes with corresponding increase in behaviors and other things. And so the job is really hard. I think to go back to kind of the question is, it's about continuing to search, continuing to talk to other people, to get new ideas, and to not stop reaching out. And sometimes that may not result in anything either. Like I'm certainly familiar with situations in which we've worked with young people who we were out of options and we're exploring other options, and other options didn't come. And in some cases, that resulted in a pretty bad outcome. But in other cases, surprisingly, because we had to continue working the way we were and bringing in new things while we waited for something else, the young people actually did okay over time, right? And so sometimes we also get stuck because we can't see the end because it's far away, or things seem so bad right now that we just can't possibly envision them getting any better. But I certainly have had enough experiences or watched other people have enough experiences that I know that hanging in is probably the most important child and youth care characteristic there is. And I have seen young people who for a year or two just didn't respond or didn't appear to respond to anything that was being attempted with them. And then, but the team stayed and just kept trying new things and just doing new things and recognizing. The other important part of this is recognizing that our value as practitioners can't be directly tied to how our young people and families are performing, right? I think that's a really important piece. Like if I am tying how I feel about myself as a practitioner with how this young person is doing, then I'm going to have a problem if that young person is not doing okay and it has nothing to do with me, right? So we need to find ways to acknowledge the work we're doing, even if we don't see the results right away, because that will keep us going. And then I've seen cases where a year or two later, you see a remarkable transformation start to occur because people are still there. And now the young person feels safe enough to start to trust, or, you know, something else shifted. So I think there's no one answer to that question, but really it's hanging in, it's getting support for ourselves so that we don't need to get it from the young people and families, so that we have other ways to ensure that we're okay, that we're validated, that we feel significant, safe, respected, related, all those things that we matter. That's important for us. If we don't take care of that for ourselves, then we're not going to have anything to give to the young people. We need to get that somewhere else. But then it's also about just, you know, try new things, talk to people, open up our minds, get new ideas. You know, one of the things we talk about a lot in my organization is if we don't know what to do, and often we don't. No, we don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. People that say they do don't really don't. But somebody in the world will know what to do. And so our job is, if we can't figure something out and we've got a young person and there's just so much complexity that we really are baffled, we don't know what, nothing we're doing is working over an extended period of time because nothing works right away, then we reach out. You know, we try to find people who have more experience than us and see if they can help us with stuff. And I've learned too, I'll stop after this point, sorry, another long answer, but I've learned that the child and youth care community particularly is extremely generous. You know, there are, like, I have been very, very fortunate in my career that I have friends and colleagues all over the place now. But those relationships were born out of helping each other in large part. And so I have never reached out to anybody that I know, or even anybody that I don't know, but who knows somebody else, and they haven't been willing to help in some way. And I think that's really, again, that's relational, right? It parallels the work that we do. So we just forget that those resources are out there, and we don't know, we didn't know.
Yeah. On that note, we want to say thank you very much. I can see that the person who posed the question also is saying in the chat box spot on, and they seem to be very happy because it brings a new understanding to hanging in, as you rightfully say, to the same problem. We could have lots of other options that we have to look at and how we can respond in the life space of the young people. I don't see any other questions that are here on the screen. It seems like we have a good understanding, but my task, I've got someone that must do the vote of thanks. Before that, we've just got a friendly reminder here from Simone. She says, a friendly reminder, CPD points will be awarded to participants who email their SA Council registration numbers to simone@nacw.org.za. So if you forward your council numbers for attendance here. We will give you, you will receive your points as we register also our presentations with the council. We're going to ask before our chairperson from the KZN region or province, Europa Mashoko, just to do the vote of thanks. And after her, we're going to call on Zeni again, just also to share with us the other webinars and topics that are lined up. So can I ask Europa just to come and do the vote of thanks for us?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is
Europa, you may open your camera, please, if possible. Thank you. We can see your beautiful face.
Thank you, Elvi. I just want to say thank you to Dr. Heather for that insightful presentation, especially from such an experienced child and youth care worker. We really appreciate it. And my take from this is the mentoring part of it, the moments of engagement and relationships. I think my child and youth care workers from here can attest to that. I always talk about relationships. It's important. I can't just give you an answer. How is your relationship with the child? If you want to discipline, if you want to make the moment meaningful, the important thing is your relationship with that child. And I also liked the quote about the creating pools of caring at all levels, because I'm also one person who thinks child and youth care workers are very important. And if we don't take care of our child and youth care workers, how are they going to take care of our children? So I thought that was very important. And we have a lot to reflect on from this presentation. So we say thank you. And I also liked what Dr. Mel said in the comment section, that this is food for the professional child and youth care work. So I really like that. So I would like to say thank you once again, and thank you to all the participants for your comments and your questions. I think we learned a lot from this, and I'm sure each and every one of us will go back, reflect, change some things, use all the reminders as well, and everything else that we have learned from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Shall we give a applause for Dr. Heather? You can also show your thumbs up or something there on the screen, but we enjoyed this tremendously, and thank you once more. Donald just asked those people that are part of the webinar just to type their names also for our register also before you leave. Can we then call on our Deputy Director, Dr. Zeni Tambadu, just to also share about the future webinars that still going to be available?
Thank you. And I wanted to say as well to you've made a difference. I think there are all child and youth care workers here will go and do something differently. And can you imagine the wonderful moments that are going to be meaningful for our children in South Africa? You have gifted us. I want to just say as well that we've had about 60 people on the webinar, but most of them are sitting in what are we calling them? Let me get the right word now. Watch parties. So there's a whole lot of people sitting around a laptop together. So you've influenced a large number of people in South Africa. So just to tell you, everybody, that this is just the start. This is the first taste of what's still to come. And we are hoping to keep these webinars going month after month till the end of the year. Next one will be in April, and that will be Mr. Jack Phelan, who will follow this presentation, and he's going to speak about the use of self in child and youth care practice. And it's a wonderful follow-up to this webinar. He will be followed in the month of May with Professor James Anglin, and Jim is going to speak on trauma, pain, and healing in child and youth care work. In June, we have James Friedman, and he is going to be speaking to us on leading with kindness in child and youth care work. The last presenter that I could announce now, the others are still to come, is Professor Nick Smyer, and he hasn't given us his topic yet, but it certainly will be something linked to behavior management. And so these are the up and coming webinars, and we hope we're going to see all 60 watch parties here again, and more, and many more, because you're going to spread the word. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for sharing with us. Dr. Heather Modlin, you have done the tone setting. So forward and onwards, I think those that came today and locked in, they're going to share with the others. There's more to come, and I hope that we will see you in the near future again, that we could listen to all your experience and all the good stories that you have to share with us that are involved in the field of child and youth care workers. So on this note, we want to say thank you to all those that have participated today for your good questions. You can still, I think we could still write some more questions, and we can connect with you in terms of challenges and practice hints. And my takeaway today as I'm leaving here is you've reminded us once again on this quietness and building on these relationships, and also just to expect greatness from the children, because the potential is within our young people, and that we mustn't just go with the flow all the time. So we are very much excited, and on that note, we would like then to close this meeting. I'm not sure if there's any final thoughts from your side before we say our goodbyes.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity. It's really been an honor to be here. I appreciate all the questions. There's clearly quite a bit of experience and knowledge in this group already, and I am always happy to be involved in anything that is for any CCW or South African child and youth care workers. So thank you for giving me the opportunity as well. It's always enjoyable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And may you have a good day further on. And thanks for all those that have logged and joined in. We'll see you, everybody. Then in April, we will announce and notify those that have participated today, so that we can share the links with all those around us. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.